챕터 2 다시 읽기. I resisted all the way, a new thing for me, and a circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself, as the French would say. I was consciousness that a moment's minute had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. Mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties, and like any other rebel slave, I felt resolved in my desperation to go all length. I felt resolved in my desperation to go all length. Hold her arms, Miss Abbott. She's like a mad cat. She's like a mad cat. For shame, cried the lady's maid. What shocking conduct! What shocking conduct! Miss Eyre, to strike a young gentleman, your benefactress' son, your young master. Master? How is he my master? Am I your servant? No, you are less than a servant, for you do not think for your keep. For you do not think for your keep. There, sit down and think over your weakness. They had got me by this time into the apartment indicated by Mrs. Reed and had thrust me upon a stool. There, sit down and think over your weakness. They had got me by this time into the apartment indicated by Mrs. Reed and had thrust me upon a stool. My impulse was to rise from like a spring. Their two pair of hands arrested me instantly. If you don't sit still, if you don't you must be tied down, said Bessie. Miss Abbott Miss Abbott, lend me your garters. Miss Abbott, lend me your garters. She would break mine directly. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy in it. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it inferred. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it inferred took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Don't take them off. Don't take them off. Don't take them off. Don't take them off. Don't take them off, I cried. I will not stir. I not stir. In guarantee whereof I attached myself to my seat by my hand. I resisted all the way. I resisted all the way, a new thing for me, and a circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. I resisted all the way, a new thing for me, and a circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. I resisted all the way, a new thing for me, and a circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. I resisted all the way, a new thing for me, and a circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. I resisted all the way. I resisted all the way. A new thing for me. I resisted all the way. I resisted all the way. I resisted all the way. A new thing for me. A circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. And a circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me, a circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bess and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself. I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. As the French would say, I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalty. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties, and like any other rebel slave, I felt reserved in my desperation to go all length. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties, and like any other rebel slave, already rendered me liable to strange penalties, and like any other rebel slave, I felt reserved in my desperation to go all length. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties, and like any other rebel slave, I felt reserved in my desperation to go all length. I felt reserved in my desperation I felt resolved in my desperation to go all length. I felt resolved in my desperation to go all length. I felt resolved. I felt resolved in my desperation. I felt resolved in my desperation to go all length. Hold her arms, Miss Abbott. She's like a mad cat. Hold her arms, Miss Abbott. She's like a mad cat. For shame, cried the lady's maid. What shocking conduct, Miss Eyre. To strike a young gentleman, your benefactress' sons, your young master. To strike a young gentleman. To go. What shocking conduct. For shame, cried the lady's maid. What shocking conduct, Miss Eyre. To strike a young gentleman, your benefactress' son, your young master. Master? How is he my master? Am I your servant? No, you are less than a servant, for you nothing for your keep. There, sit down, and think over your weakness. They had come me by this time into the apartment indicated by Mrs. Reed. They had got me by this time into the apartment indicated by Mrs. Reed, and had thrust me upon a stool. My impulse was to rise from it like a spring. Their two pair of hands arrested me instantly. If you don't sit still, you must be tied down, said Bessie. Miss Abbott, lend me your garters. She would break mine directly. Miss Abbott, lend me your garters. She would break mine directly. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it involved took a little of the excitement out of me. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it involved took Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it involved. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it involved. And the additional ignominy. This preparation for bones. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it involved. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Miss Abbott turned to divest. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. Miss Eva turned to divest a stout leg. Miss Eva turned to divest. Miss Eva turned to. Miss Eva turned to divest a stout leg. Miss Eva turned to divest a stout leg of necessary ligature. Miss Eva turned to divest a stout leg of necessary ligature. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it inferred took a little of the excitement took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Don't take them off. Don't take them off. Don't take them off. I cried. I will last her. I last her. I will last her. In guarantee whereof, I attached my hand to my seat by my. I attached myself to my chair. I attached myself to my seat to my hand by my hands. In guarantee whereof I attached myself to the seat by myself, to my seat by my hands. I attached myself to my seat by my hands. I resisted all the way. I resisted all the way. I resisted all the way. A new thing for me. A new thing for me. And a circumstance which greatly strengthened. And a circumstance which greatly strengthened the bad opinion Bess and Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. And a circumstance which great strengthened bad opinion of Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain the fact and a circumstance which strengthened the bad opinion of Bessie and Miss Abbott, were disposed to entertain of me. I resisted all the way. A new thing for me, and a circumstance which great strengthened the bad opinion of Bessie and Miss Abbott, were disposed to entertain of me. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. The fact is, I was a trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. As the French would say, 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 I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me. I was consciousness that a moment, as the French would say, as the French would say, I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny. That a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that the moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable strange penalties. Liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that the moment's I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. I was consciousness that a moment's mutiny had already rendered me liable to strange penalties. And like any other rebel slave, and like any other rebel slave, and like like any other labor slave, and like a labor slave. I felt reserved. I felt reserved in my desperation to go all length. As like a labor slave, I felt reserved in my desperation to go all length. Hold her arms, Miss Abbott. Shh, she's like a mad cat. For shame, cried the Miss Abbott. What shocking conduct, Miss Eyre. To strike a young gentleman. Your benefactress son. Your young master. Your benefactress son. Your young master. Master? How is he my master? Am I servant? How is he my servant? How is he my servant? How is he my servant? Am I your servant? No, you are less than a servant. You are less than a servant. No, you are less than a servant. No, you are less than a servant. For you do nothing for you or keep. For you do nothing. You do nothing. For you do nothing for your keep. For you do nothing for your keep. There, sit down and think over your weakness. Over your weakness. There, sit down and think over weakness. They had got me by this time. They had got me by this time into the apartment indicated by Mrs. Reed. They had got me by this time. They had got me by this time into the apartment indicated Mrs. Reed. They had got me by this time into the apartment indicated by Mrs. Reed. They had got me by this time. They had got me by this time into the apartment indicated by Mrs. Reed. They had got me by this time into the apartment indicated by this Mrs. Reed, and had thrust me upon a stool, and thrust me upon a stool, and thrust me upon a stool, and thrust me upon a stool. My impulse was to rise from it like a spring. My impulse was to rise from it. My impulse My impulse was to rise from it like a spring. My impulse was to rise. My impulse was to rise. My impulse was to rise from it. My impulse was to rise from it like a spring. My impulse was to rise from it like a spring. My impulse was to rise from it like a spring. My impulse was to rise from it like a spring. Their two pair of hands arrested me instantly. Their two pair of hands. Their two pair of hands. Their two pair of hands. Their two pair of hands arrested me instantly. Their two pair of hands arrested me instantly. Their two pair of hands arrested instantly. Their two pair of hands arrested instantly. Their two pair of hands arrested instantly. Miss Eve turned to divest. If you don't sit still, you must be tied down. If you don't sit still, you must tie down. If you don't sit still, you must tie down. You must tie down, said Miss Abbott. Lend me your cutter. She would break mine directly. Miss Abbott, lend me your cutter. She would break mine. She would break mine. Directly. Miss Abbott, lend me cutter. She would break mine directly. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of necessary ligature. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of necessary ligature. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of necessary ligature. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of necessary ligature. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. 미스 에봇은 예쁘게 시작했어. 여보세요? Miss Ebo turned to divest. Miss Ebo turned to divest. A stout leg. Miss Ebo turned to. She turned to divest. She turned to divest a stout leg of the necessary ligature. This preparation for bones. This preparation for bones. This preparation for bones. And the additional ignominy. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy in it inferred. This preparation for bones and this preparation for bones and the additional ignominy. The additional ignominy it inferred. This preparation for bones. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy. The additional ignominy it inferred. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement. Took a little of excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little excitement out of me. Don't take them off, I cried. I lost her. Don't take them off, I cried. I will last her. In guarantee thereof, I attached myself to my seat by myself. I attached myself to my seat by my hands. I attached myself to my seat by my hands. I resisted all the way. A new thing for me, and a circumstance which great strengthened the bed to도 없네 그냥. And a circumstance which great strengthened the bad opinion Bessie and Miss Abbott were disposed to entertain of me. The fact is, I was trifle beside myself, or rather out of myself. As the French would say, I was conscious that the moment mutiny had already Rendered me liable to 그 strange penalties and like any others level slave, I felt reserved in my desperation to go all length. Hold her arms. She's like a mad cat. For shame, cried the lady's maid. What shocking conduct, Miss Eyre. You strike, Miss Eyre, to strike your gentleman. To strike your young gentleman. To strike a young gentleman. Your benefactor's son. Your young master. How he was my master? Is he? Am I servant? How am I your servant? Master, how is he my servant? Master, how is he my master? How is he my master? Am I servant? No. You're less than a servant. You are less than a servant. You are less than servant. For you do nothing for your keep. For you do nothing for your keep. There sit down. Think over your weakness. They had cut me by this time. They had cut me by this time into the apartment indicated by Mrs. Reed, and had thrust under the chair and thrust me upon a stool. My impulse was to rise from it. My impulse was to rise. My impulse was to rise from it like a spring. Their two pair of hands, their two pair of hands resisted instantly. Their two pair of hands resisted instantly. Arrested me. Their two pair of hands arrested me instantly. If you don't sit still, you must tied down. You must be tied down. If you don't sit still, you must be tied down. Miss Abbott, lend your ligature. Lend your garter. Lend me your garter. Miss Abbott, lend me your garter. Miss Abbott, lend me your guitar. Miss Abbott, lend me your guitar. She would break mine. She would break mine directly. She would break mine directly. She would break mine directly. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg. Miss Abbott turned to divest a stout leg. Leg of the necessary ligature. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it referred. This preparation for bones and the additional ignominy it referred took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Took a little of the excitement out of me. Don't take them off. I cried. I will last her. In guarantee of, I attached myself by my seat. I attached myself to my seat by my hands. I attached myself to my seat by my hands. I resisted all the way, a new thing for me, and a circumstance which greatly strengthened. Mind you don't, said Bessie. And when she had ascertained that I was really subsiding, and when she had ascertained that I was really subsiding, she loosened her hold of me. She loosened her hold of me. Then she and Miss Abbott stood with folded arms. Looking darkly and doubtfully over my face, on my face, as incredulous of my sanity. Mind you don't. Mind you don't. Mind you don't. And when she had ascertained that, when she had ascertained that, when she had ascertained, when she had ascertained that, 그녀는 그것을 확인하고 나서, and when she had ascertained that, when she had ascertained that I was really subsiding, she loosened her hold of me. Then she and Miss Abbott stood with folded arms, looking darkly and doubtfully on my face, as incredulous of my sanity. She never did so before. At last, said Bessie, turning to the Abigail. But it was always in her, was the reply. I've told Mrs. Upton my opinion about the child, and Mrs. agreed with me. She's an underhand little thing. She's an underhand little thing. I never saw a girl of her age with so much cover. Bessie answered not, but ere long, addressing me, she said, You ought to be aware, miss, that you are under obligations to Mrs. Reed. She keeps you. If she were to turn you off, you would have to go to the poorhouse. But it was always in her, was the reply. I've told Mrs. Upton my opinion about the child, and Mrs. agreed with me. She's an underhand little thing. She's an underhand little thing. I never saw a girl for this age. I never saw a girl of her age with so much cover. I never saw a girl of her age with so much cover. Bessie answered not, but ere long, addressing me, she said, You ought to be aware, miss, that you are under obligation, Mrs. Reed. That you are under obligation to Mrs. Reed. You are under obligation to Mrs. Reed. She keeps you. If she were to turn you off, you would have to go to the poorhouse. You would have to go to the poorhouse. You would have to go to the poorhouse. You would to go to the poorhouse. You would have to go to the poorhouse. You would have to go to the poorhouse. I had nothing to say to these words. I had nothing to say to these words. They were not new to me. They were not new to me. They were not new to me. My very first recollection. My very first recollection of existence included hints of the same kind. My very first recollections of existence included hints of the same kind. My very first recollection. My very first recollection of existence included hints of the same kind. My very first recollection of existence included hints of the same kind. This reproach. 리프로치. 비난하다, 책망하다. 어딨어? This reproach of my dependence had become a vague sing-song in my ear. 내 귓가에 vague, 어렴풋한 노래처럼 막연한 노랫소리가 되었다. dependence, 의존. this reproach of my dependence. 나의 의존에 대한 비난은 나의 이런 의존에 대한 비난은 had become a vague, 희미한, 어렴풋한 내 귓가에 어렴풋하게 맴돌았다. This reproach of my dependence had become a vague sing-song in my ear, very painful and crushing, but only half intelligible. Very painful and crushing, but only half intelligible. Miss Abbott joined in. And you ought not to think yourself on an equality with the Mrs. Reed and Master Reed, because Mrs. kindly allows you to be brought up with them. They will have a great deal of money and you will have none. It is your place to be humble and to try make yourself agreeable to them. 리드 부인은 신세를 지고 있다는 걸 알아야 해. 그분이 아씨를 먹이고 입혀주는 거야. 만일 여기서 쫓겨나는 날이면 구기널이나 가야지. 이게 아니구나. 그리고 이댁 도련님 남매와 동등하다고 생각해선 안 돼. 주인 마님이 너를 남매들과 함께 길러주시는 것뿐이야. 머지않아 이댁 남매들은 부자가 되겠지만 너는 그렇지 않아. 얌전히 지내면서 모두의 마음에 들도록 노력하는 게 네 의무야. And you ought not to think yourself on an equality with the Mrs. Reed and Master Reed, because Mrs. kindly allows you to be brought up with them. They will have a great deal of money and you will have none. It is your place to be humble and to try to make yourself agreeable to them. What we tell you is for your good. Added Bessie, in no harsh voice. You should try to be useful and pleasant. You should try to be What we tell you is for your good, added Bessie in a harsh voice. You should try to be useful and pleasant. 상냥하고 발음. You should try to be useful and pleasant. Then perhaps you would have a home here. But if you become passionate and rude, passionate, rude, passionate, 격정적이고 rude, 예의 없는. If you become passionate and rude, Mrs. will send you away, I am sure. Besides, God will punish her. He might strike her dead in the midst of her tantrums. 성질. 그녀가 짜증내는 가운데 her dead. He might strike her dead. 그가 strike her. 그녀를 때릴 수도 있다. her dead. She might strike her. 그녀를 때릴 거다. dead in the midst. 뭔 소리지? 그녀의 짜증. her dead. 그녀의 죽음을 때릴 것이다. 그녀를 때려 죽일 수도 있다. her dead. strike her dead. He might strike her dead. 그가 죽음으로 칠 수도 있다. He might strike her dead. 죽게 때릴 수도 있다. In the midst of her tantrums. And then where would she go? Come back. We will leave her. I wouldn't have her heart for anything. 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 Say your prayers, Miss Eyre, when you are by yourself. For if you don't repent, something bad might be permitted to come down the chimney and fetch you. Bad might be permitted to come down the chimney and fetch you away. They went, shutting the door and locking it behind them. The Red Room was a spare chamber, very seldom slept in. I might say never indeed, unless when a chance influx of visitors at Gateshead Hall rendered it necessary to turn to account all the accommodation it contained. For if you don't repent, something bad might be permitted to come down the chimney and fetch you away. Something bad might be permitted. Something bad might be permitted to come. Something bad might be permitted. 굴뚝에서 악마가 내려와 잡아갈지도 몰라. Something bad might be permitted to come down the chimney and fetch you away. Permitted to come down the chimney and fetch you away. Something bad might be permitted to come down the chimney. Something bad might be permitted to come down the chimney and fetch you away. Something bad might be permitted to come down the chimney and fetch you away. They went, shutting the door. They went, shutting the door. They went, shutting the door. They went, shutting the door and locking it behind them. They went, shutting the door and locking it behind them. 그들은 갔다. shutting the door. 문을 닫고 갔다. 문을 닫고 갔다. 그리고 문 뒤를 잠궜다. They went, shutting the door and locking it behind them. The red room was a spare chamber. 붉은 방은 spare, 남는 방이었다. The red room was a spare chamber, very seldom slept in. 좀처럼 자러 가지 않는 방이다. 극히 드물게 자러 가는 방이다. I might say never. 난 절대 말하지 않은 것이다. 정말로. Unless when a chance influx of visitors at page18 rendered it necessary to turn to account all the accommodation it contained. 나는 정말 안 된다고 말할지도 모른다. 응? 그것들을 포함한 모든 숙박시설을 고려할 필요가 있어서 제공해야 할 정도로 그것들을 포함한 모든 숙박시설을 고려해야 할 필요가 있을 정도로 그것들을 포함한 그 모든 숙소를 제공해야 할 정도로 그 필요가 있을 때까지 있을 정도로 손님이 몰려드는 기회, 손님이 모여드는 가능성이 있을 때 unless가 뭐지? 뭐뭐 하지 않는 한 unless 뭐뭐 하지 않는 한 그런 때가 아닌 한 정말로 I might say never. I might say never. I might say 절대 아니라고 말할지도 모르지. 이 방은 좀처럼 쓰지 않는 방이야. 근데 이 정도로 손님이 몰려들지 않는 이상 정말로 그냥 아예 쓰지 않는, 그냥 절대 아니라고 말할 수도 있어. 말할지도 몰라. I might say never. 아니라고 말할지도 몰라. 아니라고. 그러니까 그 정도도 아니라고. 그 정도로 쓰는 것도 아니라고 말할지도 모른다 이거지. The red room was a spare chamber. The red room was a spare chamber, very seldom slept in. I might say never. I might say never, indeed, unless when a chance influx of visitors at Gateshead Hall rendered it necessary to turn to account all the accommodation it contained. I might say never. I might say never, indeed, unless when a chance influx of visitors at Gateshead Hall rendered when a chance influx of visitors at Gateshead Hall rendered it necessary to turn to account all the accommodation it contained. Yet it was one of the largest at state list chamber in the mansion. 맨션에 크고 웅장한 방들 중에 하나다. largest. 이 주택에서 가장 크고 호화로운 침실 가운데 하나였다. Yet it was 뭐뭐일 뿐이다. Yet it was one of the largest and stateliest chamber in the mansion. Yet it was one of the largest and stateliest chamber in the mansion. A bed supported on massive pillars of mahogany, hung with curtains of deep red damask. 마호가니 웅장한 기둥이 받치고 있고 선홍색의 비단 커튼이 드리운 침대는 방 한가운데 신전처럼 놓여 있었다. A bed supported on massive 엄청나게 큰 육중한 어딨노? Massive pillars 기둥, 육중한 기둥. A bed supported on massive 웅장한 기둥. Pillars. A bed supported on massive pillars of mahogany. 메호가니에 육중한 기둥이 받치고 있는 침대. hung with curtain, deep red damask, 붉은 데머스크. 짙은 붉은 짙은 빨강색의 데머스크 커튼이 매달려 있는 supported on, hung with curtain, 커튼이 달려 있고 메호가니가 받치고 있는 침대. A bed supported on massive pillars of mahogany, hung with curtains of deep red damask. Deep red damask stood out like a tabernacle in the center. Stood out like a tabernacle in the center. tabernacle. 신전처럼 방 한가운데 신전처럼 눈에 띄었다. 신전처럼 놓여 있었다. 방 한가운데에 신전처럼 놓여 있었다. 방 한가운데 신전처럼 놓여 있었다. The two large windows. 언제나 덧문이 닫혀있는 두 개의 큰 창문에도 선홍색 꽃무늬를 놓은 커튼이 쳐 있었다. The two large windows. The two large windows. 두 개의 커튼. With their blinds always drawn down. With their blinds always drawn down. 언제나 덧문이 닫혀있는 블라인드, 언제나 그들의 블라인드는 always drawn down, 다 내려져 있었다, 닫혀 있었다. 언제나 were half shrouded가 덮인, 싼. In festions and folds and similar drapery. And for festions, 장식. The two large windows with their blinds always drawn down were half shrouded. 창문은 were half shrouded, 반쯤 덮여 있었고, the two large windows with their blind always drawn down were half shrouded, 반쯤 덮여 있었고, 항상 내려져 있는 블라인드는, 항상 블라인드가 쳐져 있는 두 개의 창문은 반쯤 덮여 있었고, in festoons and folds of similar drapery. 드레이퍼리와 유사 similar. 드레이퍼리 천으로 내려져 있었고, were shrouded in festoons. 장식으로 반은 덮여 있었다. 창문은 장식으로 반은 덮여 있었고, 드레이퍼리 천으로 folds of similar drapery. folds of similar drapery. 옷자락 떨어지다도 되지만 여기서는 옷자락으로 쓰이네. 비슷한 옷감의 옷자락. 옷자락, 장식과 비슷한 옷감의 옷자락으로 festoons, 장식과 비슷한 옷감의 옷자락으로 반쯤 덮여 있었다. The carpet was red. The table at the foot of the bed was covered. The carpet was red. 카페트도 붉었고, the table at the foot of the bed. 침대 발치의 테이블로 덮여 있었다. 침대 끝에 놓여있는 탁자도 붉은 보로 덮여 있었다. The carpet was red. The table at the foot of the bed was covered. 침대 끝에 놓여있는 탁자도 덮여 있었다. 붉은 with a crimson cloth. crimson. crimson, crimson, 진홍색, crimson, 어딨어? crimson cloth, 진홍색, 진홍색 천으로 덮여 있었다. The walls 짙은 빨간색. The walls were a soft fawn. 엷은 갈색. The walls were a soft fawn color with a brush of pink in it. 벽은 핑크색을 띤 한갈색이었다. The walls were a soft fawn color with a brush of pink. blush. 빨개지다. 핑크로 붉은. 핑크의 붉은. 핑크색으로 붉어진. 그러니까 핑크색을 띤 황갈색이었다. The walls were a soft fawn. The walls were a soft fawn color with a brush of pink in it. The wardrobe. 옷장. The wardrobe. The toilet table. 화장대. The chairs were of darkly polished old mahogany. 오래된 마호가니로 된 옷장 화장대 의자는 darkly polished old mahogany. Chairs were of darkly polished of darkly polished. The wardrobe, the toilet table, the chairs were of darkly polished. were of darkly. 어둡고 빛난. 오래된 마호가니로 된 요것들은 of darkly polished. 짙은 광이 났다. 광이 많이 났다. darkly 깊게 광이 났다. The wardrobe, the toilet table, the chair were of darkly polished old mahogany. Out of these deep surrounding shades rose high and glared white the piled up mattress and pillow of the bed, spread with a snowy Marcellus counterpane. 이런 주변의 짙은 빛깔과는 대조적으로 침대 위에 쌓여있는 매트리스와 베개만은 밝게 빛나고 있었는데 눈처럼 흰 마르세유 직물이 덮여 있었다. Out of these deep surrounding shade. 이런 주변에 surrounding shade rose high shades. Out of these. 이것들 주변에 짙은 surrounding. Out of these. Out of these. Out of these. 이 중에서. Out of these. surround. 이 중에서. 이런 환경 속에서. 뭐뭐 중에서. 뭐뭐 중에서. 이러한 주변 속에서 shade. 이러한 주변에 짙은 빛깔 속에서 out of these deep surrounding 인근의 짙은 주변의 색깔들 속에서 이런 짙은 주변들 색깔 중에서 또 색깔 가운데 out of these deep surrounding of shadow rose high 높게 솟아 있었고 glared white 하얗게 빛나고 또 piled up mattress and pillows of the bed 침대에 쌓여 있는 매트리스와 베개는 하얗게 빛나고 있었다. 높이 솟은 채로 높이 솟아 있었고 하얗게 빛나고 있었다. Spread with a snowy Marseilles 마르세유 칭물이 덮여 있었다. 눈처럼 빛나고 있었는데. Spread with a snowy 눈을 뿌려놓은 것처럼. Spread 펼치다. Spread with 눈을 펼쳐놓은 것처럼. Spread with a snowy Marseilles 눈처럼 흰 마르세유 작물 counterpane 직물 마르세유 직물 눈처럼 하얀 마르세유 직물이 펼쳐져 있었다. Spread with a snowy Marseilles counterpane 침대는 Out of these deep surrounding shades, out of these deep surrounding shades, loose high and glared white, the piled up with glared white, the piled up mattress and pillows of the bed, spread with a snowy Marcel's counterpane. Scarcely, 거의 뭐뭐 하지 않다. scarcely, 겨우 간신히. less prominent, 중요한. 여기다가 이렇게 하고 scarcely, 거의 뭐뭐 하지 않다. prominent, 중요한. was an ample, 충분한. cushioned, easy chair, near the head of the bed, also white with a footstool before it, and looking as I thought like a pale throne. 침대 머리맡이 발판이 달려있고 커다란 쿠션이 깔린 안락 의자 또한 밝게 빛났다. scarcely, 겨우 간신히, 뭐뭐 하자마자. less prominent, 눈에 잘 띄는. 중요한. less, 덜 눈에 띄는. 거의 눈에 띄지 않는. scarcely less prominent. 이게 무슨 말이네. scarcely less, 뭐뭐 못지않게. prominent, scarcely, 거의 뭐뭐 하지 않다. 거의 뭐뭐 하지 않다. 덜 중요한, 눈에 띄는. 덜 중요한, 덜 중요해서 거의 뭐뭐 하지 않다. 이게 무슨 말이지? scarcely, 겨우 간신히. scarcely less는 뭐뭐 못지않다. 여보세요? scarcely 어딨지? 뭐뭐 못지않게. scarcely less prominent, scarcely 거의 뭐뭐 하지 않던데. 눈에 띄다. prominent, scarcely less prominent was an ample. was an ample cushioned, 빵빵한 쿠션. easy chair, cushioned, 빵빵한 쿠션이 들어간 easy chair, 안락 의자였다. 침대 머리맡에 놓여있는 안락 의자였다. also white with a footstool before it. 그 또한 하얗고 with a footstool before it. 그거 전에 그거 앞에 있는 footstool 또 밝았다. 그리고 looking and looking as I thought like a pale throne. 마치 희뿌연 옥자처럼 내가 생각한 대로 그렇게 보였다. Was an ample cushioned easy chair near the head of the bed. Also height with a foot. 안락 의자였는데 안락 의자 또한 하였다. 그 앞에 있는 그거 앞에 있는 풋스툴 역시 하였다. Scarcely less prominent was an ample cushioned easy chair near the head of the bed, also height with a footstool before it. 그 앞에 풋스툴도 있었는데 and looking 보이기로는 그렇게 그렇게 보였다. and looking 보니까 as I thought like a pale throne 희뿌연 옥자처럼 생각되었다. This room was chill because it seldom had a fire. It was silent because remote from the nursery and kitchens. This room was chill because it seldom had a fire. 좀처럼 불을 피우지 않아 방은 썰렁했고 방은 추웠고 유거실이나 부엌과 멀리 떨어져 있어서 조용했다. This room was chill because it seldom had a fire. It was silent because remote from the nursery and kitchens. Because remote from the nursery 멀리 떨어져 있어서 remote 외딴 먼 멀리 떨어져 있어서 조용했다. solemn 침통한 solemn because it was known to be so seldom entered. 또 사람들이 별로 출입하지 않기 때문에 장엄한 느낌조차 돌았다. 사람들이 좀처럼 출입하지 않아서 solemn kitchen solemn because it was known to be so seldom entered. It was known to be 사람들이 좀처럼 출입하지 않는 것으로 알려져 있어서 장엄한 느낌까지 들었다. It was known to be It was known to be 뭐라고 알려져 있었다. 어쨌든 so seldom 거의 뭐뭐하지 않는 것으로 알려져 있었다. 출입하지 않는 것으로 알려져 있어서 장엄하기까지 했다. The housemaid alone came here on Saturdays. 토요일에 하녀가 들어와서 to wipe from the mirrors. 일주일 동안 쌓인 먼지를 청소하고 from the mirrors and the furniture a week white dust. 일주일 동안 쌓인 먼지를 청소하고 weeks quiet dust. 쌓인 먼지를 일주일 동안 쌓인 먼지 a week's white dust. And Mrs. Reed herself at far intervals visited it to review the contents of a certain secret drawer. At far intervals. 토요일마다 하녀가 들어와서 일주일 동안 쌓인 먼지를 청소하고 어쩌다가 리드 부인이 옷장 속 비밀 서랍을 살피러 올 뿐이었다. And Mrs. Reed herself at far intervals visited it to review the contents of a certain secret drawer. 여러 종류의 옷장 속 여러 종류의 of a certain 확실히 비밀스러운 서랍 certain of a certain secret 어떤 비밀의 어떤 비밀 서랍의 여기선 어떤 비밀 서랍의 내용을 확인하러 올 뿐이었다. 옷장 속의 어떤 비밀 서랍의 비밀 서랍을 살피러 올 뿐이었다. Where were stored diverse parchment. 그 속에는 여러 가지 서류와 보석함, 죽은 남편의 초상화 등이 간직되어 있었다. Where were 거기에는 stored diverse parchment 여러 종류의 서류가 쌓여 있었고 her jewel casket her jewel casket and a miniature of her deceased husband. Deceased husband. 초상화. Deceased husband. And in those last words, 그 죽은 남편이라는 말에, in those last, 그 마지막 말에 lies the secret of the red room. 그 붉은 방의 비밀이 있다. The spell which kept it so lonely in spite of its grandeur. 이토록 훌륭한 방임에도 불구하고 so lonely, 텅 빈 느낌이 드는 마력. 죽은 남편이란 말에 이 방의 비밀이 숨어있는 것이다. In those last words, 그 마지막 말, 죽은 남편이라는 그 마지막 말에 이 붉은 방의 비밀이 있었다. The spell which kept it so lonely in spite of its grandeur. 이토록 훌륭한 방임에도 텅 빈 듯한 느낌이 드는 마력. Mr. Reed had been dead 9 years. Mr. Reed had been dead 9 years. It was in this chamber he breathed his last. Here he lay in state. Hence his coffin was breathed. Mr. Reed had been dead 9 years. It was in this chamber. Mr. Reed had been dead 9 years. Mind you don't, said Bess, and when they went shutting the door and locking it behind them. The red room was a spare chamber, very seldom slept in. I might say never, indeed, unless when a chance influx of visitors at Gateshead Hall rendered it necessary to turn to account all the accommodation it contained. The red room was a spare chamber, very seldom slept in. I might say never, indeed, unless when a chance influx of visitors at Gateshead Hall rendered it necessary to turn to account all the accommodation it contained. Yet it was one of the largest and stateliest chamber in the mansion. A bed supported on massive pillars of mahogany, hung with curtains of deep red damask. Stood out like a tabernacle. In the center. Stood like a tabernacle in the center. The two large windows, with their blinds always drawn down, were half shrouded in festoons and furs of similar drapery. The carpet was red. The table at the foot of the bed was covered with a crimson cloth. The table at the foot of the bed was covered with a crimson cloth. The walls were a soft fawn color with a brush of pink in it. The wardrobe, the toilet table, the chairs were of darkly polished on mahogany. the wardrobe, the toilet table, the wardrobe, the wardrobe, the toilet table, the chairs were of darkly polished old mahogany. Out of these deep surrounding shades rose high and glared white. Out of these deep surrounding shades rose high and glared white the piled up mattresses and pillows of the bed, spread with a snowy Marcellus counterpane. 마르셀러스 마르세유 카운터페인이 아까 뭐였지? Marseilles, 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 Marseilles. Spread with the snowy Marseilles counterpane, scarcely less prominent was an ample cushioned easy chair near the head of the bed, also white, with a footstool before it, and looking, as I thought, like a pale drone. This room was chill because it seldom had a fire. It was silent because remote from the nursery and kitchens. Solemn because it was known to be so seldom entered. The housemaid alone came here on Saturdays to wipe from the mirrors and the furniture or weeks quite dust, and Mrs. Reed herself, a far inner verse, visited it to review the contents of a certain secret drawer in the wardrobe, where were stored divers parchment, her jewel casket, and a miniature of her deceased husband. Visited to review the contents of certain secret drawer in the wardrobe, where were stored divers parchment, her jewel casket, and a miniature of her deceased husband, and in those dressed words lies the secret of the Red Room, the spell which kept it so lonely in spite of its grandeur. The spell which kept it so lonely in spite of its grandeur. Mr. Reed had been dead 9 years.